When I was 18, still living in Estonia, it's like, well, you're gonna have your own studio in New York. I was like, yeah, no fucking way. That's how is that even possible?
We operated by, trial and error. That was definitely a weird experience.
It felt like almost like coming home, and like taking your mask off and being like, thank God.
I didn't feel confident for sure. The first thought was like, shit, am I doing like a big mistake?
Hi there, I'm Anatoly Gromov and you're listening to Control Shift, a podcast by Libo Studio and Humbleteam. From the very start of this season, I'm telling stories of various shifts. Our heroes are game changers in science, medicine, society, and other industries. And that got me thinking, what about the most common, mundane shift? Basically, when people switch from being employed by an enterprise to being self-employed. Well, maybe not every single story like that changes the world, but it's something that a lot of us can relate to. You might be a startup founder who has just finished this challenging journey, or you might run your own coffee shop, or maybe you're an employee who keeps wondering what it's like to be your own boss. I'm sure everybody has thought about it. It's like all teenagers have that "I'll have my own band" phase. I myself certainly went through it. That's not a figure of speech. I had a band, but that's a story for another time. And today, I want to talk about these shifts. I'll tell you 3 different stories of people who left their corporate jobs to start their own business. Since I'm a designer myself and I work for a consultancy, you guessed it. For this episode, I talked to designers, good friends of mine who once took that risk. We will talk to Anton and Irene of Anton and Irene, creative directors turned design power duo. Sergey and Anton, our friends from Humbleteam, a product design agency I mentioned once or twice in this podcast. And a designer and serial startup founder, Tobias Van Schneider.
I don't see much of a difference between working, whether you work at Facebook or you work at an agency or it's just you're going somewhere and you're just part of that place.
The agency that we worked at before, Anton and I, for many years, really carried the burden of making that place run, at least creatively. Both of us kind of at the same time were like, okay, how much longer can we really be doing this? Okay, maybe we get a lot of money and maybe we become partners or whatever, but we're going to be stuck doing work that we don't like.
This is Anton Riponin and Irene Pereira. I met them about 10 years ago when all 3 of us worked at Fantasy Interactive, or FI. It's a big agency that specializes on what was called back then interactive design, meaning users' interaction with everything from flashy Flash websites to kiosks and automotive interfaces. Among its clients are Netflix, Twitter, Google. FI is known as high-class premium, when you need a really good-looking luxury design, you call these guys. Anton was a creative director of the agency. He was responsible for creative strategies development. Irene was a UX director. Her team was responsible for user experience strategies. That's what we could call an exemplary successful career in design. Yet Anton and Irene started wondering whether they should leave it all behind and step into the unknown.
So one of the main responsibilities was to manage the design team. At that time, I felt that, the longer I stay there, it's just the prospect will be, I'm just going to do exactly this, but more, or on a bigger scale. And that, to a certain degree, frightened me because I'm a designer and I didn't really want to, spend the rest of my life is just managing teams and, getting cool projects. Even if we were to get them, they immediately go to other designers to do
it. Was almost like an inevitability, like we both kind of reached the end of what we could do and wanted to do at FI. at the same time.
The choice was whether we're gonna bust our asses for something that we own or for ourselves, or we're gonna do it for someone else.
Anton and Irene started thinking about their own studio. Not a big agency where they once again would have to manage people, but a place that allowed them to create by their own rules. They were getting used to this idea for about a year. Because, it's not as easy as it seems to shut the door even if you're fed up. Anton, for example, had to change his status in the US to be able to quit and start his own business. But the main task was, of course, to weigh the pros and cons. At one point, they just packed their bags, turned off their phones, and went to Indonesia for a month. During this improvised vacation, they finally came to a decision. It was time to quit and start their own journey.
It was almost like, when you go to university or you go to a new school and it's like, it's new, it's exciting, you know that something is going to change. I love change. So for me, it was like, oh, great, this is something new, something different, something exciting that we don't know the answers to.
I was just completely open-minded. It was more of an experiment, and hopefully it's going to work. If it doesn't, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. And I think another maybe mantra that we had, and I think that we still share sometimes, is low expectation, high satisfaction.
Another thing that Anton and I really shared in that sense, and we never cared about the money. Why am I working so hard for money? We knew also that leaving the job meant a very high chance of no money. And in fact, when we started, we both put in $100,000 of our own savings each, basically with the idea of like, okay, we will pay our own salary for the first year with our own savings, like artificially. So that way we can actually do work that we want to do and we're not forced to take on whatever random work comes our way because we have to keep the lights on. The freedom that we bought basically with this savings, right, was the freedom that we were able to say no.
Listen, I just love that. These guys be like, why am I working so hard for money? And the next minute, we actually have some savings. Yeah, that's why you work for money. I think it's important to remember it. Money gives you freedom. If not now, then in the future. That's how our guests got their own studio that they gave their own names. It's called Anton and Irene. But money was not the only thing their agency background provided them with.
We were lucky, I think, that we had already quite a large network at our fingertips, right? In design, everything is about your network. I guess we were maybe underestimating how important that aspect was and how big our network actually was.
I also think we underestimated how prepared we were to do the work from start to finish. From creating a contract, from signing a contract, all the way to actually launching the whole thing and being responsible for the launch.
If there was anything that was surprising was actually how much easier it was than we thought it would be. Like I said, we actually thought, okay, shit, we're going to pay our own salary for the first year. That's why we were putting in $100,000. And we never had to touch that money, We were fully prepared to do it, but we never had to do that.
Were there any obstacles? Were there moments that you were like, oh, maybe that's not, doesn't turn out as we were expecting? Or, did you have these moments at all? Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say, I was listening to Irene and Anton and I was just confused. The circumstance of the story seemed almost too perfect. It turned out that the very thing they were striving for almost ruined them.
Things that I think we didn't anticipate is that the dynamic between us would really change if it's just the two of us. We were working in a very large team with very different people. We were like a unit against everybody else. It's like almost like you need a common enemy type of thing, And when that fell away and we didn't have that anymore, and it was literally just the two of us sitting in an office, for me, that was very difficult to adjust to. Like imagine you spent 8 hours a day going to an office and only seeing one other person. And I think for me at least, it was like, oh shit.
Now that's interesting. That's what these guys actually wanted. That's the model they were looking for. And even the name of their studio, Anton and Irene, speaks for itself. There is the two of us. Just the two of us. But of course, in fact, it was just a setback. After the adjustment, Anton and Irene got, without exaggeration, everything they wanted.
If you start a business, and at the very beginning you called us entrepreneurs, and I was like, because for me an entrepreneur is a word that's connected to growth. Like, I cannot imagine an entrepreneur that is against growth. And we are, in 8 years, we grew from 2 people to 2 people.
We don't have like a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, or we don't want to take over the world. Like we're basically just taking it one day at a time. And we have a luxury that we don't have any employees, which means that we don't have to go actively work to find work to feed these people, literally, you know? So we have the power to really choose our projects very carefully. And in fact, we say no all the time.
And that changes everything. It changes your first thought when you wake up in the morning. Because my first thought when I was waking up in the morning during a FI is like, well, holy shit, how I would not be late for the job right now. But now the first thought is completely different. So it's always because we control our own time.
I like stories like that because they remind us that everything is in our hands. You just need to look at it from the right angle. This story is simply about a mismatch of values. You see, typically corporations value non-stop growth, effectiveness, entrepreneurial spirit, all that stuff. And the system of goals, tasks, evaluations, and KPIs is built accordingly. So if your definition of success or your highest value, for example, pure creativity and freedom of self-expression, contradicts that, then your needs simply cannot be fulfilled here. That's neither good nor bad, that's just how it is. And the key is just noticing the discomfort and seeing that it stems from this profound contradiction. Anton and Irene's story is so pictured perfect exactly because of that. They left and built their own system, their workday, schedules, work relationships, goals, priorities, and even office, based on their own set of values. No wonder they are so happy with the outcome. Now they can't even imagine living any other way.
I think the era of agencies is over. I really don't understand why people still start an agency today and employ, 40 people or 30 people. I think this is it feels a little bit medieval today.
When Anton says that the era of agencies is over, I totally understand that. This is a very particular point of view. Anton and Irene went away from enterprise of doing business, and they feel awesome being on their own. Broadly speaking, it's the way of freelance. However, as a designer with experience from various companies, I can say that agencies still live and prosper across my heart. And for example, my next guests also worked for a big corporation and also decided to leave. But they don't mind all these things Anton and Irene ran from, managing their own team, running 20-30 projects at a time, and actually this is what drives them.
I'm Anton.
I'm Sergey. I'm a design director and co-founder here at Humbleteam.
Well, of course I couldn't but talk to Humbleteam. Sergey and Anton also met in the office of a big company, but in their case it was truly a huge corporation. It was CA Technologies, a major software developer with tens of thousands of employees around the world. Later it was taken over by Broadcom for $19 billion. Guys created mostly banking apps or infrastructure monitoring applications. By that time, Sergey had already had some experience in launching his own startups. Those attempts failed, we must admit, but that startup-ish glitz still lured him. Anton and Sergey never worked on the same tasks at work, but they did go to lunch together. And gradually they became close friends, though their collaboration started outside that company.
I've been working on part-time freelance projects from time to time, and from some point I started to get such a number of these projects that I needed certain help, and I decided to reach out to Anton because I knew that he's a good designer and probably he can help out.
Basically, working in an enterprise company, it isn't always very fun. For me, that additional work with Sergey was basically a way not to, make additional money, but to, make myself, more fulfilled and useful.
For instance, in big organizations and big companies, we had tasks like, to interview 40 or 50 different people working in US-based banks. And that's something you do like from Monday to Friday. After that, you basically come home and there are, for instance, new fintech startups saying like, oh, we have like $5 million of dollars in investments. And we need a designer to help us out to build this completely new product.
What was lacking in your experience in working for this corporate company?
Many times we had some innovative ideas to change whatever processes were set up in the company. And the frustration that was sort of building up because of our inability to change anything within the company. And I guess the pace, slow pace and lack of control definitely pushed me towards working on these more, quicker iteration type of work with Sergey.
Those side projects were growing in number and it started to look really appealing. Anton and Sergey were not approached simply as contractors. They were seen as people whom you can entrust your business to. And of course it makes you feel valued, like you become your client's equal partner. To handle these projects, guys sometimes hired freelancers and eventually realized that they needed to acquire legal status to provide proper service to their clients. And it would seem that here it is. You have your own business that evidently works. Time to quit, right?
I definitely never thought of opening, a company myself and working on a management position because I always had my father an example from me who basically shifted from being sort of hands-on worker in radio engineering towards managing his own company. And I was always thinking that I would never do that.
When we started to hire additional designers, then I guess it became like inevitable that we're gonna stick to this Humbleteam idea.
I was actually actively thinking which one I should quit. Like I wasn't really that sure that I should quit the corporate one. It stopped being fun and started being very sort of stress-inducing.
Unlike our first guests, these co-founders were about to break up. But at the end of the day, Sergey's optimism outweighed their fears, and they committed to working in their own agency full-time.
For at least a year or year and something, we pretty much didn't make any money out of it. It was a pretty hectic time. Sometimes we needed to, pay designers from our own money to basically stay afloat. That was definitely a little weird experience. You have to cross the line, like a mental line to, to say, no, that's not my money anymore.
Oh yeah, that was, I guess, the biggest mental shift. Because at the very beginning, when it was just like, freelance-based operations, it was like you have, thousands of dollars. You can just go to a bar, like spend thousands of dollars with Anton, right? But it wasn't like that anymore.
Where do you think you picked up all of these necessary details of running a business?
Well, we didn't. I guess that the whole environment was pretty much supportive because from the very beginning, we work mainly with startup companies, and just like us, they knew nothing about hiring new employees, hiring like design agencies, working on a product, right? So the whole atmosphere was kind of like reassuring and like encouraging. That was the main idea, I guess, behind our processes, like focus on design quality, on design services first, and then somehow sorting out like the contracts or other additional paperwork issues. And yeah, it worked out.
Why not? That can be a strategy too. You focus on your strengths and your expertise, and the rest will come with experience and mistakes, one way or another. Now Anton and Sergey manage 15 to 20 different projects at once, working with 10 or 15 different designers, mentoring and educating them at some point. And yes, here scaling up was not without structural changes too. Earlier, the co-founders could communicate with everyone personally on a weekly basis. Today, it's simply impossible, so they had to introduce a system of levers. Unlike Anton and Irene, they consider this to be even more fun than designing everything on their own. But the key is that they finally found what they were looking for in those side projects. Now they do not just cater business, but they fuel it. Design is not just a nice decoration, but the engine of the company. Remember what it was like in the early days of electronics. I'm not talking about enormous ECMs of the mid-20th century. I mean when electronics first appeared in our everyday life. Back then, no one thought about how elegant and friendly the interface could be. Like, what are you talking about? Is never before seen computing power entering your homes not enough for you? Friendly interface, huh? What else, do you want it to be made of the finest silk and silver? But then Apple came and changed the game. What if a computer says hello to the user? And also let's make the system unit invisible, the layout optimal, and the app icons funky. A few thought out touches and the user experience was on another level. And consequently, Apple products took a completely different place in people's lives. Yes, I just told you the most abused story about design, but now you get what Humbleteam co-founders are striving for: the opportunities to bring substantial changes to business.
Basically, there was a certain notion in the industry at some point several years ago that there is a thing that was called a unicorn, which was a developer and a designer in one person. And the idea was that, if the designer knows how things are being developed. And I think this notion, this paradigm, at least for us, it shifted towards business. Being a designer is solving problems. We were working on sort of this medical company, and we created an interface to evaluate the performance of all the ambulance brigades here in Prague. We're basically helping the community. We're doing something substantial that maybe will influence my life as well. Like maybe if I was in trouble, then my interface would help to save me.
Anton has just spoken about the shift in design as a whole, more precisely, what the role of a designer is. Well, we could talk about how it has been changing throughout decades, but that's a whole different story. The thing is, my next guest is to some extent familiar with this unicorn mode. Namely, he used to be a developer who accidentally ended up as a designer. He's never studied design on purpose, and actually at the time he had just started his developer training. He was only 15. Now, he's not only a sought-after professional, but presumably one of the most famous designers who is closely watched by the whole industry.
I was playing Counter-Strike at the time, and I was in a clan. It's kind of like a group of people that come together to play, and we needed a website. And at the time, I was doing an apprenticeship as a software engineer, so I had a background in programming. Then as part of the website, you need the design, you need some banners, signatures for a forum, of course.
This is Tobias Vanschneider. He used to be an art director and product design lead at Spotify. Now he's the owner of 3 companies. But let's go back to the start of his career. After designing the website for his Counter-Strike clan, he had a cavalcade of design jobs. Freelancing, working for agencies, his own startup, working directly with clients and other studios. Orders, orders, orders. But then Tobias thought, why not get a full-time office job?
I just wanted something new, something more challenging, just taking it to the next level. I actually went for the first time in my life real full-time, which is also where I met you.
You came from a one-man show, basically running your own thing, into somewhere you were kind of told how to do things, right? How did that feel?
I think it was all right. If you, under the assumption that the people that you work with, that you respect them a lot, I think it works. So it didn't feel like someone was telling me what to do, It felt more like someone's just challenging you to do great work, but you still have to come up with that great work. And sure, that doesn't happen in all agencies, right? I think I would have probably had a problem if someone would have been telling me what to do.
Freedom, drive, challenge. Like, Tobias, are you sure you were talking about employment? But yes, that's basically how it works. You always strive for the opposite, for something you're lacking. So working for a company turned out to be a breath of fresh air for him. However, a couple years later, Tobias went further. From the agency, he moved to Spotify, a way bigger company that was skyrocketing at the time.
I think my main motivation was in terms of growth. personal growth. Working at a larger company, there's so much you can learn. That's also something that I worked on, is being used by millions of people around the world. I think that's something that I couldn't really experience in the agency setting that we had before.
It was 2013, and no doubt for Tobias many things were different there. Well, something that we discussed with other guests, a slower tempo, a more complicated way of decision-making and negotiating. But maybe the main difference was far more significant. Having worked in many different places with a huge number of customers and finite projects, Tobias came to realize that it's product design that he wanted to try next, to focus on one thing only to make it perfect.
That's a massive shift. It always felt like, oh, the project is over, but I feel like now is actually the time to really make a difference. I want to continue working on it. I want to continue refining. And that's usually the time when you were already being taken away from the project and you're given a new briefing, right? So it felt nice to be like, hey, I can work on the same product for years to come. I can really refine it. I can really think about it. I can give it time. And then, of course, your whole mindset shifts, right? Because if I work on one product only, or even like a small part of that product, I have so much time and I can really focus on it.
Why some people are more prone to this approach, and then some people are actually more, driven by high pace, always changing projects type of environment?
I think age plays a role for sure. People who usually get a little bit older will prefer the product approach, but that's mainly just because when you're young, you don't know what you want. You also have a lot of creative energy and you don't know in which direction to channel it. So you're like, I just want to work on a lot of cool shit, right? It's like, and there's a beauty about that, right? Because you will never get bored. I can promise you that. Then usually when you get older, you're trying to settle a little bit. So I think it has to do with age, but then of course that doesn't apply to everybody. I think some people just have it in their character. Product design is every day the same thing, right? That's not easy for some people.
Okay, which one are you? Which type are you?
Neither.
Neither. Interesting. How so?
So I think I'm neither, and I think that leads us probably to the next shift, which would be building my own products.
Working for Spotify, Tobias realized that doing one big product is something that he was looking for. And yet 3 years later, he started to feel tired of working for a corporation. He decided to quit. Looks like he found himself missing the scale. Yes, for him Spotify was lacking the scale.
I think at the time it felt probably more scary. I have what many people would consider a dream job at a large tech company, which is growing crazy. The first thought was like, shit, am I doing like a big mistake, right? I'm leaving a spaceship that's about to go to space,
So what made you do that then?
Stupidity. Just like there's certainly like a belief in myself, but I think it's also a little bit of ignorance, stupidity, just fucking do it kind of attitude. I think I had like some backup money for sure for like 6 months or so. I think I was good, but not much more than that. I mean, New York is really hard to do backup money, to be honest. My backup was if it all fails, I just go back to where I came from.
At the same time, Tobias didn't want to even consider starting his own agency. He would burn out and drown in the flow of projects. He's already been there. So how to take the best out of these two worlds? How not to get either bored or exhausted by an endless race? The answer was your own product or your own company.
As a studio, you sell your time, correct? Usually when you bill per hour or per day, you sell your time. Now, you have 24 hours, so you can sell 24 hours theoretically. Now, if you have sold all of that, in order to make more money, you could theoretically raise the price, which is going to be difficult, or you can hire someone which has another 24 hours, and then you can sell those, right? And then eventually you hire another person and another. But in the end, you're still billing time, you're still selling time, and in order to sell more time, you have to find more time. And you do that by hiring people, of course. So for me, it was like, that's not really what I want to do, because that means just increasing headcount and then billing more hours, and that just doesn't feel like a sustainable solution for me. I was like, why can we not just do something else? And for me, product made sense because you could theoretically make $1 million more every year with the same amount of people in your team, right? As long as you just increase the revenue per head or per employee, right? Through automation, through scale. So for me, it just made sense. I was like, I need to sell my own product because then I don't become a slave of that time selling anymore.
Tobias launched a platform called Simplice, both a convenient instrument to create a portfolio and a community of world's leading designers. It's like Product Hunt but for designers. A few years later, Tobias became the head of Carbon-Made, a similar service, also a portfolio constructor. Very easy to use, but its audience was much wider, both because of simplification and inclusion of other professionals but designers. Basically, everyone can get a web page there. Photographers, musicians, artists, and so on. He wasn't the creator. Carbon-Made was launched in 2005, but it seems like another episode of the same shift. Create and develop a useful product for the creative community to let this community simply and conveniently show themselves in their work. Finally, a bit later in 2018, Tobias came up with a new idea which he used to go beyond his community. He started to work on My Mind. It's a kind of service that helps, I'd say, live. It's like your second intelligence. In fact, yes, it's an AI which remembers everything for you, classifies, arranges, and keeps information. And it's always at hand. It's not even a platform. It's like a system that consists of an app, browser extension, your gadgets, an extension of your own mind. So today, Tobias runs 3 companies, and at the same time, he can't stand the word entrepreneur. He considers himself a creator of beautiful and useful things.
To me, being a designer means having the strong urge of designing everything around you. Maybe the only advice that I would give myself is get more help more early on. I think I was doing a lot of things myself and with my co-founders, so it took us a long time to actually hire people into our teams. That's probably the only advice.
When talking to my friends, I was taken aback again and again, mainly by the fact that everything is about perspective. What is more challenging, to quit or to get employed? Is managing people a burden or is it fun and joy? For me, these stories once again highlighted how important it is to listen to yourself and your own wishes. There is actually nothing more pleasant than when a person smiles at you and says, "It's the perfect fit for me, buddy." I also noted 2 things that every single guest of this episode told me in different words. The first one is that nobody made a shift for the sake of money. Was it worth changing your regular world with good, really good income for some vague prospects? Of course, one could argue that we chose to talk to 5 successful people. No, duh, but still. They obviously cared more about their happiness than comfort, and after all, it made them take that risk. The second thing is about the way back. These guys have always borne in mind that the life doesn't end as a result of false direction. That there are jobs to do, and simply put, you'll be fine one way or another. And I prefer to believe we will. Control Shift was brought to you by Libo Studio and product design agency Humbleteam that works with startups and enterprise in all business sectors on land, at sea, and in space. Go to humbleteam.com to learn more. Sound design for this episode was created by Alexei Vorobyov, and also special thanks to Blue Dot Session. The names of everybody who worked on the episode you can find in the description. And I'm your host, Anatoly Gromov. See you in 2 weeks.